The first time Anita Westcott decided Johnson Bingham did not matter, it rained for 3 days straight over the Cotswold Hills, and she told herself the ache in her chest was nothing more than the damp getting into her bones. She was 28. He was 23. In the world she had built for herself, a world of spreadsheets, of 5-year plans, of a mother's voice in her ear reminding her that a woman's clock does not wait for a boy to grow up. 5 years was not a number. It was a verdict. Anita was the kind of beautiful that made people forget what they were saying mid-sentence. Warm brown skin, a mass of dark curls she usually pinned back for work and let loose on weekends. Wide, watchful eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth built for the kind of smile she rationed carefully, as if it cost her something. She carried herself like a woman who had decided early that she would never again be caught unprepared, spine straight, chin level, heels loud on pavement. Johnson, even at 23, didn't look like a boy anyone should have been able to dismiss. Tall, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who rode or boxed rather than merely lifted. With a jaw his mother liked to say he'd inherited from his grandfather and a habit of running a hand through dark, slightly too long hair when he was thinking. His eyes were a pale, startling gray, the sort that made people finish their sentences more honestly than they meant to. He didn't dress like old money so much as wear it without noticing, the way some men wear comfort. "You're a child, Johnson," she had told him once, on the stone steps outside her flat in Bingham, the autumn leaves scattering around their feet like something out of a film neither of them wanted to be in. "I don't date boys who still ask their mothers for pocket money." It wasn't even true. Johnson Bingham hadn't asked his mother for a shilling since he was 19. Since the day his father handed him the keys to a subsidiary of Bingham Holdings and told him to either sink or build something worth the name. He'd built, quietly, doggedly, the way he did everything, the way he'd loved her, actually long before she noticed. But she said the word immature like a door closing, and Johnson, proud, wounded, 23 and utterly certain of what he felt, had simply nodded and said, "Fine." Friends, then. And meant it, because some part of him believed that if he stayed close enough, long enough, patient enough, the 5 years would stop being a wall and start being nothing at all. He had no idea it would take 5 more. It happened on a night neither of them planned. A bottle of wine too many at her cousin's wedding, a taxi that never came, his flat 2 streets closer than hers. Anita told herself later it was the champagne. What she couldn't tell herself, no matter how she tried, was that she hadn't wanted it. She had. God help her, she had wanted it for years, and when it finally happened, clumsy and urgent and far too tender for something she meant to regret, she felt something crack open in her chest that she immediately tried to seal back shut. In the morning she was cruel, because cruelty was easier than honesty. She gathered her clothes and her dignity in the same armful and said the kind of thing designed to leave a mark. This was a mistake. I don't do this with boys who still haven't figured out who they are. Johnson said nothing. He simply watched her go, the way you watch whether you cannot control. He wanted more than the night had given him. He always had. But now there was a wall where a door used to be, and no amount of knocking seemed to move it. 6 months of silence. Then a phone call at midnight, her voice thin and frightened down the line, words sliding into each other. "Johnson, something's wrong. I think someone's put something in my drink. Please come." He was at the party before she'd finished the sentence. He carried her out past a room full of people who didn't look twice, put her in the back of his car, and drove her to his own flat, because it was closer and because some animal part of him refused to let her out of his sight. She was frightened and pliant and grateful in a way that undid something in both of them. And when it happened again between them that night, she told herself it was gratitude. The truth she folded away and refused to look at, was that she liked him, had always liked him, liked the steadiness of him, the quiet decency, the way he never once made her feel small for needing rescuing. The age gap was the only argument she had left, so she held on to it the way a drowning woman holds on to driftwood, even as the tide kept pulling her back to shore. I'll use this, she decided, lying awake beside him while he slept, watching the rise and fall of his chest and hating how safe it made her feel. I'll enjoy it while it lasts, and when I meet someone my equal, I'll leave. It was, she would later understand, the cruelest thing she ever decided, crueler than any word she'd thrown at him, because Johnson Bingham had already decided the opposite. He was going to love her until she believed him. He pampered her the way only old money knows how, not with excess, but with attention. He remembered how she took her tea, the exact shade of milk. He learned the names of her sisters, her mother's birthday, and began, without ever announcing it, to simply appear with the things that eased her, an umbrella outside her office on a day she hadn't checked the forecast. No note attached, no explanation asked for. When she told him flatly that she would not be photographed with him, would not be introduced to his circle, would not have their life together exist anywhere but behind closed doors, he agreed without argument. He told himself love could wait to be seen. He told himself patience was its own kind of proof. What he did not tell himself, could not yet let himself see, was that every time she spoke of the future, he wasn't in it. Not once. Not in a single sentence. She'd talk about where she wanted to live in 5 years, what she wanted for her 35th birthday, and there would be no we, no us. Only a careful, well-rehearsed I. He noticed. He filed it away the way you file away a hairline crack in a foundation, certain that time and care would seal it before the house came down. 14 months in, Anita found out she was pregnant. She sat on the edge of her bathtub with the test in her hand, and the first thing she felt, before the fear arrived, was a small and shameful flare of joy, gone almost as soon as she recognized it. She did not tell him. She could not bring herself to. Could not imagine standing in front of his mother, in front of the polished halls of Bingham House, and saying, I am carrying your son's child, and I am 5 years his senior, and I have no interest in becoming his wife. Could not imagine the lawsuits that would follow if she tried to raise his children alone, and he decided, one day, that money bought custody. He was, after all, from a family that did not lose. So she did the only thing her fear knew how to do. She became cruel on purpose, thoroughly, surgically, said words designed to sever rather than wound, words she rehearsed in the mirror until they didn't sound like her own voice, and then she left the city before he could ask a single question, before the small, stubborn flare of joy could talk her out of it. For years passed the way rivers pass, quietly, relentlessly, carving new shapes into old ground. Johnson built. He grew Bingham Holdings past what his father had ever imagined, filled his calendar so full there was no room left for the ache he refused to name. He did not date. His mother worried aloud at every family dinner. His friends teased him for turning into his own grandfather at 28. He simply worked and waited for a feeling he couldn't explain to loosen its grip on his chest. It never did. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday over nothing more than lunch, his friend Brian, sandy-haired, perpetually sunburned across the nose no matter the season, built like the rugby player he'd been at university and never quite stopped resembling, mentioned that he'd seen a woman in Kingston upon Thames who looked remarkably like Anita Westcott. Johnson didn't flinch. Not until Brian added, almost as an afterthought, that she'd had 2 children with her. Small ones, no more than 3 years old, close enough in age that Brian had assumed. At first glance, they were twins. Johnson set down his fork very slowly. Say that again. I said she had kids with her. Why does that? Brian stopped, reading something in Johnson's face that made the rest of the sentence unnecessary. Johnson asked for every detail Brian could remember. The school run, the coffee shop on the corner, the little terraced house on a street lined with sycamores. And by the following morning he was in Kingston, standing across from a primary school gate with his hands in his pockets and his heart going like a fist against a door. He did not confront her. Some instinct, colder and more careful than grief, told him to wait, to be certain, to not let 4 years of controlled fury spend itself on a mistaken face in a crowd. He watched the gates until a small girl ran out among the others, dark curls escaping a plate, Anita's exact chin. He crouched down, smiling the way strangers are taught to smile at children, and asked her name. Gina, she said, delighted to be asked. I'm 3.5. That's my brother. We're twinnies, but not really. Mummy says we're Irish twins. Johnson's throat closed around something he refused to name in front of a child. He thanked her, plucked a single strand of hair from where it had caught on her jumper, and walked to his own car without another word. His hands did not shake until he was safely inside it alone. The results came back 9 days later. There was no surprise in them. Only confirmation of something he had already known, standing at that gate, watching a small face that was unmistakably his own, and a second name on the report, a second child, a son he had never once heard mentioned in 4 years of silence. 3 days after that, he stood on Anita's doorstep in Kingston and threw 2 things onto her kitchen table: a DNA report and a custody suit already filed with the courts. She stared at the papers, then at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You are being watched, he told her finally, and his voice was not loud, which somehow made it worse. If you so much as think about running with my children, I will make sure you spend the rest of your life looking for them and never finding them again. Johnson. For years, he said, cutting through whatever she'd been about to offer. For years, Anita. I have a son I found out about from Brian. Over lunch, like it was gossip about someone else's life. His jaw worked. You don't get to explain that to me today. Not like this. He left before she could try. There was nothing, really, that she could have said that wouldn't have sounded like what it was. For days later, Anita drove to Bingham, to the great gray house at the end of the Sycamore Line Drive where Johnson had grown up, because there was nothing left to do but face him properly. She had not accounted for the celebration. Cars lined the gravel. Laughter carried from the open windows. The Bingham family had gathered to welcome home the younger son, David, back from 3 years abroad. She sat in her car at the end of the drive for 11 minutes before she found the nerve to walk up and ring the bell. She who had once known the door code by heart, who had let herself in and out of that house 100 times in another life. Johnson's mother, Abigail, answered with a face that did not know whether to be kind or wary. Is Johnson home? Anita asked, her voice smaller than she intended. I need to speak with him. He came down the stairs a moment later, unhurried, unsurprised. He had, in truth, been expecting her for days. Well, he said, loud enough for the room behind him to hear, though his eyes never left hers. You still remember where the house is. Funny, you used to just walk in. You knew the code. A pause, deliberate as a blade. What changed? The room behind him had gone quiet. Glasses stopped clinking. Somewhere a child's toy rattled and stilled. His mother's hand found his brother David's sleeve. A small, warning pressure. Are you here to see the immature man? Johnson went on, each word measured and merciless. So immature, and yet apparently capable enough to give you. Johnson. Her voice cracked through his. Can we talk? Alone. The family read the room the way families do, and filed out without being asked twice, leaving the two of them standing in a house that had once, briefly, felt like it might belong to both of them. She had done the arithmetic on the drive over, and over, and every version of it came out the same. He had resources. He had patience, or had once had it before she'd spent it all. He had, apparently, love turned to something harder now, and she had nothing but a pair of small hands that were not enough to fight him with. So she had come, finally, not to argue but to plead. Johnson, I'm sorry. Her breath caught. I kept it from you because What do you want? He cut in flat. Can you withdraw the case? Her hands twisted together, knuckles pale. Let's talk about this like adults. The word adult struck something in him he hadn't known was still raw. Adults, he repeated, and something in his voice finally broke through the calm. When did I become one to you? I was a child, a tool, something you used and put away when you were done, and called it my immaturity so you never had to call it what it was, a decision. Your decision. Every single time. She had no defense for that. None at all. Her mouth opened and closed around apologies that felt too small for what she owed him. Please, she said instead, quieter now, her eyes stinging. Withdraw the case. I'll do whatever you ask. Anything. Yes, anything. He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt it in her spine, long enough that the silence itself became a kind of answer, and said, Clear your schedule tomorrow. 1 o'clock. We're registering our marriage. She stared at him. Marriage? Johnson, I can't marry you. He laughed, short and humorless, and turned toward the stairs as if the conversation were already over. I thought you said anything. If you're not willing, don't bother coming back. She left the house that night with her fists clenched and her pride in tatters, and she did not sleep. She sat up with her children on either side of her, watching them breathe, and understood, with a clarity that frightened her, that pride was a luxury she had already spent. She was back on his doorstep by morning. They married in a registry office with no photographers and no announcements, exactly as she'd once demanded their entire relationship remain. Private, unclaimed, hers to control. He gave her that much. He took her to Portugal for a honeymoon she hadn't asked for, left the children in his parents' capable hands, and was, against every expectation she'd carried into that white-walled office, patient. You didn't think I'd force anything on you, did you? He asked, the first night, when she sat rigid on the edge of the hotel bed waiting for a demand that never came. I didn't know what to think, she admitted, which was the closest thing to honesty she'd offered him in 5 years. Get some sleep, Anita. He turned off the lamp on his side of the bed and left a careful, deliberate foot of space between them, and she lay awake a long time in the dark, disoriented by the absence of a fight. They came home a week later to a dark house and 2 sleeping children, and once she tucked them in, she found Johnson in the hallway and asked, almost defiantly, where her room was. You didn't expect a newly married couple to sleep in separate rooms, Johnson said. It wasn't quite a question. Don't get ideas, she warned, chin lifted, though her heart was going too fast for the tone she was aiming for. This isn't real. The day the children turn 5, I'm filing for divorce. Something in his jaw tightened. She watched him decide in real time not to answer that, and he only nodded once and walked past her into the bedroom. 2 years, then, he thought, lying down on his side of the bed, staring at the ceiling. 2 years to make her forget she ever said that. He didn't touch her. Not that night, not the next, not for 3 months of nights spent on the same mattress with a careful, deliberate distance between them. Though the distance narrowed by inches, he never let her see him measuring. He learned the sound of her breathing when she was truly asleep versus pretending. Some nights he woke to find her hand inches from his, close enough that the smallest movement from either of them would have closed the gap. He never made that movement. He'd promised himself 2 years, and he intended to spend them proving something to her that words alone hadn't managed in 5. She lay awake more often than she wanted to admit, listening to him breathe, aware of his warmth the way you're aware of a fire you're not allowed to sit beside. At first she told herself she was relieved. Then, as the weeks went by and he still did not reach for her, she told herself she'd simply lost whatever charm she'd once held over him. She began testing small things, almost without meaning to. She let her hand brush his when she passed him a plate. She watched him with the children, patient through tantrums, ridiculous during bath time, gentle in a way she hadn't let herself imagine he'd be, and felt something in her chest loosen that she'd spent 5 years keeping locked. By the 3rd month, lying in the dark listening to the low, even rhythm of his sleep, she caught herself studying the line of his shoulder, the particular scent of him that clung to the sheets, and admitted, silently, furiously, that she wanted him. Not just his hands, all of it. The steadiness she'd once mistaken for immaturity, because she hadn't had a name yet for what real constancy looked like. She told herself it was only want. Only a body remembering another body. But want, given enough quiet nights to grow in, has a way of becoming something far less convenient. She noticed the way he always let her have the last word with the children, even when he was right. The fact that in 3 months he had never once thrown her past back at her, though she'd handed him 100 openings to do it. She thought of the girl she'd been at 28, so certain that 5 years was an unbridgeable gulf, so certain that maturity was something written on a birth certificate instead of proven in 1,000 quiet decisions to stay. She thought of everything he'd carried without complaint, her secrets, her cruelty, her children, her conditions, and understood, with the particular horror of a woman realizing she has been wrong about the one thing she was most certain of, that she had fallen for him completely. Her pride would not let her say it plainly. Not at first. She spent a week rehearsing the words in her head the way she'd once rehearsed cruelty in a mirror, and found honesty a far harder script to memorize. One night, in the dark, unable to sleep, unable to keep pretending the distance between them was something she wanted, she reached across the small, careful space and let her hand rest flat against his chest, over the steady, patient beat of a heart that had never once stopped waiting for her. Johnson went still. She felt him wake fully beneath her palm, felt the moment he understood what her hand meant and chose, deliberately, not to move too fast. Anita. Just her name, low, a question inside it. I was wrong, she said into the dark, before her nerve could leave her. About all of it. About you being too young to know your own mind, when you knew it better than I ever let myself know mine. I've spent 5 years calling you immature, so I wouldn't have to admit I was afraid of being older, of being wrong, of loving someone the world would say I shouldn't. Her voice shook. Age is nothing but a number, Johnson. I just couldn't bring myself to say it while I still had something to lose by being right. His hand covered hers where it lay against his chest, holding it there like he was afraid it might disappear if he let go. Took you 5 years and 2 children to work that out, he murmured, and she felt, rather than saw, the smile in his voice. Don't gloat, she said. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, she laughed, really laughed, low and unguarded, and let him pull her the rest of the way across the distance she'd spent 5 years insisting on. They did not need a wedding photograph or an announcement to know what they'd become. In the months that followed, Anita stopped flinching when he mentioned the future, because for the first time in her life, she was in it, plainly, without qualification. Gina and her brother grew up in a house full of noise and patience in equal measure, never once knowing there had been a version of their lives where their father was a stranger and their mother a woman running from a truth she was too frightened to keep. In the end, it was never the world that had to be convinced. It was only ever the two of them, a girl who had mistaken fear for wisdom, and a boy who had grown, quietly and without asking for credit, into exactly the man she'd once refused to believe he could be. The end.